smooth?
It was interesting.
Yeah? Where does interesting send us?
Seconds before they kill her, she looks them dead in the eye and tells them something that changes everything. She will kill them all. Not a threat, not a bluff, a promise. And by the end of this episode, you are going to believe every single word of it. Lioness Season 3, Episode 4 is here, and honestly, this might be the episode where the entire season finally shows its true face. If you have been watching this show since Episode 1, you already know that Taylor Sheridan does not build tension for fun. He builds it because he is about to break something. And in Episode 4, titled around Joe hunting a ghost network, that break is coming fast, and it is coming for people we actually care about. Let's talk about where we left things. By the end of Episode 3, the breach inside the Lioness program was no longer a rumor or a paranoid theory whispered in a hallway. It was real. Someone close to Joe, someone with real access, has been feeding information out, and that single fact has poisoned every relationship on this show. Every conversation Joe has with her team now carries a second meaning. Every glance is a question. Who talked? Who sold them out? Who is still loyal? And who is only pretending to be? That kind of uncertainty is honestly more dangerous than any gun in this show, because you cannot shoot paranoia, and you cannot arrest a feeling. Now, Episode 4 picks up that thread and pulls it hard. According to what we know so far, Joe is the one leading the hunt this time. Not reacting, not cleaning up someone else's mess. Leading. Her team is chasing down a hidden network, one that has been operating quietly through covert handlers, the kind of people who never show their faces, who never leave fingerprints, who exist only as whispers and dead drops and burner phones. This is not a straightforward op where Joe kicks down a door and the mission ends. This is the kind of hunt where every lead she finds only proves how much bigger the problem actually is. And that is exactly what makes this episode so unsettling. Joe is not fighting one enemy anymore. She is fighting a structure, a system, something built to survive even if one piece of it gets cut off. And that is honestly the scariest part of this season so far. In seasons 1 and 2, Joe always knew who she was up against. There was a name, a face, a target. This time, the season synopsis itself has been warning us. Patterns appear where they shouldn't. Names vanish. Paths rearrange. That is not just marketing language. That is basically telling us that Joe is walking into a fight against something that keeps changing shape the moment she gets close to it. A ghost network is the perfect description because ghosts do not stand still long enough to get caught. While Joe is out there hunting, back at headquarters, Kaitlyn and Westfield are dealing with their own version of hell. These two have always been the calm, calculating brains behind the entire Lioness program, the ones who plan 5 steps ahead while Joe is the one pulling the trigger. But in Episode 4, it looks like even they are running out of room to maneuver. They are working to assess just how serious this threat really is, and from everything we have seen building across this season, the answer is not going to be comforting. When people like Kaitlyn and Westfield start looking rattled, that tells you the danger has gone past anything they can quietly contain behind closed doors. These are not people who panic easily. If the trailer is showing us cracks in their composure, that is a massive warning sign for what is coming in the back half of this season. Let's be honest about something. This season has already proven it is not afraid to put Joe's family in the crossfire. We have seen the show hint again and again that the danger is not staying contained to the battlefield anymore. It is reaching into Joe's home, into the people she loves, into the version of her life that has nothing to do with being a CIA operative. That is what makes this season hit different compared to the first 2. Joe has always been able to compartmentalize. Work is work and home is home. But this year, that wall is cracking and Episode 4 looks like it is going to widen that crack even further. So let's get back to that opening line, because it is worth sitting with for a second. Someone is seconds away from being killed, and instead of begging, instead of breaking down, she turns the moment around completely and warns her captors that she is going to kill them all. Think about the kind of person who says that with a gun pointed at them. That is not fear talking. That is someone who has already accepted the worst outcome and decided to make sure her enemies regret it anyway. In a show built around women who are trained to survive impossible situations, That line hits like a mission statement for the entire Lioness program. These are not victims. These are predators who have simply been cornered for a moment, and cornered predators are the most dangerous kind. Now here's where it gets interesting for anyone trying to guess who that line actually belongs to. Given everything building across this season, there are a few strong possibilities. It could be tied directly to the Ghost Network storyline, meaning Jo or one of her operatives gets captured mid-hunt, flipping the entire dynamic of the episode from hunter to hunted in a matter of seconds. That kind of reversal is classic Sheridan, building an episode around control, then snatching that control away right when the character and the audience feel safest. Or it could be connected to the ongoing kidnapping thread that has been simmering underneath this season since the earlier episodes, which would mean the stakes are not just about national security anymore, they are deeply personal. Either way, the fact that the trailer leads with a moment like this tells you everything about the tone of episode 4. This is not a slow political chess match of an episode. This is Sheridan pulling the pin and letting the tension explode. And knowing how this show has structured its seasons before, episode 4 usually lands right in that dangerous middle stretch where a season stops setting things up and starts paying things off, sometimes in ways that genuinely hurt to watch. What makes Lioness so gripping is that it never treats violence as spectacle for its own sake. Every gunfight, every interrogation, every quiet, threatening conversation in a parking garage carries weight, because the show has spent real time making you understand exactly what these characters stand to lose. Jo is not some invincible action hero. She bleeds, she makes mistakes, she carries guilt home with her. So when the trailer promises bullets, blood, and a woman staring down death and refusing to back off, you know the show has earned that moment instead of just throwing it at you for shock value. There's also something worth noticing about the structure of this season so far. Every episode has been building a slow-burning sense that the walls are closing in from multiple directions at once. The Ghost Network hunting Jo, the breach still unresolved inside her own team, the threat now creeping toward her family, and now, apparently, a moment violent enough that someone is staring death in the face and choosing defiance instead of surrender. That is a lot of pressure stacking on top of one storyline, and shows like this do not stack pressure like that without planning to release it in a huge way before the season is over. If you go back and think about how Season 1 and Season 2 both handled their midpoint episodes, you'll notice a pattern. This is usually the point where a mission that looked clean on paper turns into something far messier, where trust between characters gets tested in ways that cannot be undone, and where at least one relationship on the show takes permanent damage. Episode 4 fits that pattern almost perfectly. Jo leading a hunt against an enemy that refuses to hold still, Kaitlyn and Westfield scrambling to keep up with a threat that keeps outpacing their intelligence, and a cold open that puts someone's life on the line before the episode even properly begins. That is a lot of narrative weight for 1 hour of television, and it strongly suggests this is one of those pivotal episodes that changes the direction of the entire back half of the season. One more thing worth pointing out. The covert handler's angle is genuinely clever from a storytelling perspective, because it means Jo cannot simply eliminate a single mastermind and call the mission complete. Handlers exist specifically to keep the real decision-makers hidden and protected. Every handler Jo finds is just another layer, another disposable piece of a much larger machine. That structure guarantees this storyline is not wrapping up in a single episode, and it also guarantees that Jo's frustration is going to keep climbing, because in this world, someone who plays by the rules and follows procedure is often at a disadvantage against an enemy who has no rules at all. So where does this leave us heading into the episode? Jo is deeper into a hunt that keeps revealing how little she actually understands about the size of the threat. Kaitlyn and Westfield are watching the clock, fully aware that whatever window they had to contain this quietly is closing fast. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a life hangs by a thread, tied to a warning that sounded less like fear and more like a promise of payback. Every piece of this trailer is pointing toward an episode that raises the stakes of this season in a way that is genuinely hard to predict. And honestly, that unpredictability is exactly why this show keeps pulling people back in week after week. Let's slow down for a second and really think about what a ghost network means inside a world like this. In real intelligence work, and this show has always leaned on that grounded, almost documentary level of realism, a network like this does not operate through one office or one boss sitting behind a desk somewhere. It survives by staying fragmented on purpose. Small cells that barely know each other exist. Handlers who only ever meet their assets through coded messages or dead drops, never face-to-face if they can help it. Money moved through channels designed to look completely ordinary. That is what makes this kind of enemy so exhausting to fight, because you can win every single battle and still lose the war, simply because the structure itself is built to keep bleeding and regenerating no matter how many pieces get cut away. When the show frames this as a ghost network, it is telling us Jo is not chasing a person this time. She is chasing an idea, a system, something that does not die just because you kill the man standing in front of you. That is exactly why Kaitlyn and Westfield running out of time matters so much as a phrase. These two are not field operatives. They are the strategists, the ones who are supposed to see the whole board before anyone else does. Their entire value on this show comes from staying 2 steps ahead of the chaos so that Jo and her team do not walk into something they cannot survive. So when the trailer frames them as running out of time, that is not just about a ticking clock on one mission. That is a signal that the intelligence side of this operation, the side that is supposed to protect everyone by knowing more than the enemy, is starting to lose that edge. And on a show like this, once the planners lose their advantage, people in the field start paying the price for it. Think back to how Season 2 ended. That season taught us that on this show, no one is safe simply because they are smart, or careful, or good at their job. Bad outcomes happen to competent people constantly because the enemies Jo faces are not sloppy either. They plan, they adapt, they exploit exactly the kind of overconfidence that comes from thinking you have the upper hand. So if episode 4 is building toward Kaitlyn and Westfield feeling the walls close in, that history should make you nervous, because this show has already shown it is willing to let its most careful characters get blindsided. Now let's talk about pacing, because that matters a lot for how this episode is probably going to feel once it airs. Episode 3 left us with the breach fully confirmed and the kidnapping thread still simmering in the background, unresolved and getting heavier with every passing hour of screen time. A showrunner like Sheridan does not let a season sit in a holding pattern for too long. He lets tension build just long enough to make the audience uncomfortable, and then he detonates it. Everything about the way episode 4 has been described, Jo on the hunt, handlers being exposed one by one, Kaitlyn and Westfield scrambling, and a cold open with someone facing death and refusing to flinch, points toward this being one of those detonation episodes. Not the finale, not the moment everything gets resolved, but the moment the season stops warning you and starts actually hurting you. There is also a quieter thread running through all of this that is worth paying attention to, and that is the emotional cost these missions keep placing on Jo personally. This show has never pretended that being excellent at this job comes free. Every season, we watch Jo pay a price for the choices she makes, whether that is trust broken with the people closest to her, or time lost with her family that she can never fully get back, or the simple, grinding toll of living a double life where almost nobody around her knows the full truth of who she is. If episode 4 really does push the danger closer to her home life, that is not just a plot twist for shock value. That is the show continuing to ask its central question, which is how much is Jo actually willing to sacrifice, and at what point does the job start costing her more than she can afford to pay? It is also worth thinking about the covert handlers themselves for a moment, because handlers are a fascinating kind of antagonist. They are not the face of evil the way a bomber or an assassin is. They are quiet, patient, almost bureaucratic in how they operate. They recruit people slowly. They manipulate through pressure and blackmail as often as money. They think in years, not days. Facing an enemy like that forces Jo into a completely different mode of operating than the more direct threats she has dealt with before. She cannot simply overpower a handler in a straight fight the way she might overpower a soldier. She has to outthink them, trace them, and expose them before they vanish back into the shadows they came from. That shift in tactics alone should make this episode feel different in tone from the more explosive, direct confrontations we saw earlier in the season, even with all the action the trailer is promising. And that contrast, the quiet, patient hunt for handlers versus the sudden, violent cold open with someone facing death, is probably exactly the kind of whiplash this episode is built around. One moment, careful investigative pressure, tracing money and messages and faces in crowds. The next moment, pure chaos, a life on the line, someone refusing to go down without making a promise of revenge on the way out. That kind of tonal shift is what makes an episode memorable instead of forgettable, and it is exactly the kind of storytelling this show has built its reputation on since season 1. So here is the real question heading into this episode. Is Jo going to actually pull the thread all the way and expose the real structure behind this network? Or is this the episode where she realizes just how much bigger and more entrenched this enemy actually is, forcing her to accept that this fight is going to stretch far beyond a single mission? Given everything the season has set up so far, patterns appearing where they shouldn't, names vanishing, paths rearranging, it feels far more likely that episode 4 raises more questions than it answers. That is not a criticism. That is exactly what a strong mid-season episode is supposed to do. It is supposed to make the danger feel bigger, not smaller, and from everything we know right now, that is precisely where this show is heading. One last thing before we wrap this up. It is worth remembering how good this show has always been at making you trust a character right up until the moment it pulls the rug out from under you. Every season of Lioness has included at least one person who seemed reliable. Someone Jo leaned on, someone the audience assumed was safe, only for the story to reveal a crack running underneath the entire time. With the Breach storyline still hanging over episode 4, and with a hidden network built specifically around handlers who blend into ordinary life without raising suspicion, this feels like exactly the kind of season where the biggest threat is not the person shooting at Jo from a distance. It is the person standing next to her, smiling, offering help, while quietly feeding information somewhere else entirely. Keep that in mind as this episode plays out, because on this show, the most dangerous enemy is rarely the one holding the gun. Let me know in the comments who you think that opening line belongs to, and whether you believe the Ghost Network storyline is about to collide headfirst with the danger circling Jo's family. Drop your predictions below for what Kaitlyn and Westfield are actually racing against, because this season has been dropping hints since episode 1, and I think a lot of it is about to connect. If you enjoyed this breakdown, drop a like and stick around, because once this episode actually airs, there is a lot more to unpack.